There's a kind of pain that doesn't leave bruises, the kind that lives quietly in your choices, your relationships, your self-worth. And for many, that pain doesn't come from enemies or accidents. It comes from the person who was supposed to love them most, their mother. You see it in someone like Maya, a woman in her 30s, who has achieved success on the outside, but feels perpetually inadequate on the inside. Every time someone criticizes her, even gently, she spirals into self-doubt. Every relationship feels like walking on eggshells. And no matter how much therapy she does, she keeps asking herself the same question. Why do I feel so broken? What Maya doesn't yet realize is that the answer doesn't begin with her. It begins with her mother. Because before we ever learn who we are, we learn who we're allowed to be in the eyes of the woman who raised us. That relationship, whether warm or cold, present or absent, nurturing or controlling, becomes the blueprint for how we see ourselves and the world. Healing doesn't begin by blaming her, but by seeing her clearly, her love and her limitations, her intentions and her impact. In this video, we'll uncover 7 truths about your mother that may hurt to face, but will finally set you free. If you've ever felt stuck, confused, or haunted by wounds you can't explain, this might be the missing piece. Let's begin. Number 1, she loved you, but that doesn't mean she understood you. Love is often assumed to be enough. A warm presence, a roof over your head, food on the table. And yet, so many people grow up feeling unseen, even in the arms of a mother who insists, "I did everything for you." That's because love and emotional attunement are not the same. A mother can love her child fiercely and still fail to truly understand who that child is. She can meet physical needs, provide structure, and even say the words "I love you" every day, and still miss the internal world unfolding behind her child's eyes. Picture a little boy who loves to draw, who spends hours quietly sketching in his notebook. His mother, practical and busy, praises him only when he brings home good grades or does something useful. Over time, the boy learns not that his art is bad, but that it simply doesn't matter. Or imagine a girl who's deeply sensitive, who cries when others are hurt or overwhelmed by loud environments. Her mother tells her, "Stop being dramatic," or "toughen up." In both cases, the child's emotional reality is quietly erased, even if the parent's love is genuine. This kind of emotional misattunement doesn't leave obvious scars. It leaves confusion, a deep, lifelong question of why do I feel wrong for being me? As adults, these children often struggle with self-trust. They second-guess their feelings, hesitate to speak up, and feel a vague emptiness in relationships, unsure why they never quite feel known. That's because the earliest mirror they had, their mother, reflected back a distorted or incomplete image. When a mother is unable to meet her child's emotional needs, not out of malice, but from her own limitations, the child learns to abandon parts of themselves to keep the love they depend on. This might mean silencing their sadness, performing for approval, or shrinking to avoid judgment. And even when they grow up and leave home, that pattern often continues. They may attract partners who also overlook their emotional needs, or pursue careers that are impressive but unfulfilling. The child who was never truly seen becomes the adult who doesn't know how to show themselves, or even who they really are. To begin healing, you have to acknowledge this. Your mother may have loved you deeply and still not have seen you clearly. That truth is not an accusation, it's an opening. Because once you stop confusing love with understanding, you stop settling for relationships where you are only partially accepted. You start doing the brave work of seeing yourself fully, maybe for the first time. Number 2, her pain became your blueprint. We inherit more than eye color or cheekbones from our mothers. We inherit emotional patterns, coping mechanisms, and unspoken fears. Often, without realizing it, a mother's unresolved pain becomes the emotional blueprint her child follows. Not through deliberate teaching, but through the air they both breathe, the tone in the room, the reactions to stress, the rules of love that are never spoken but deeply felt. A mother who grew up walking on eggshells around a volatile parent may raise her children with the same unconscious fear of conflict. She might teach, not with words but with glances and sighs, that being agreeable is safer than being authentic. Her daughter, watching closely, learns the silent art of people-pleasing. She becomes hyper-aware of everyone's moods, always adapting, always shrinking herself to keep the peace, even when no one asks her to. This transmission isn't intentional. Most mothers are simply repeating what was modeled to them, doing the best they can with what they were given. But emotional pain, left unexamined, doesn't just disappear. It gets passed down like a family heirloom. A son raised by a mother who internalized guilt from her own upbringing may grow into a man who over-apologizes, who feels responsible for everyone's discomfort, who sacrifices his own needs to avoid being selfish. And he might never question it, because that's the emotional currency he was raised with. Guilt as loyalty, sacrifice as virtue. Consider the story of Lena, whose mother was abandoned emotionally by her own parents. Her mother vowed to never let her child feel unloved, and she didn't. But she also clung too tightly, pouring her fears and unmet needs into Lena's life. Lena grew up feeling responsible for her mother's happiness. As an adult, she struggles with boundaries, choosing emotionally needy partners, and constantly trying to fix people. She doesn't know why she feels exhausted by love, until she begins to realize she's been living her mother's pain story, not her own. This is the legacy of emotional inheritance. It's not about blame, it's about recognition. When you can name the patterns that didn't begin with you, you gain the power to end them with you. Your mother's anxiety doesn't have to be yours. Her wounds don't have to shape your relationships. Her silence doesn't have to become your default. The moment you understand that her pain became your blueprint is the moment you start drafting a new one that's finally your own. Number 3. She taught you how to feel or not feel. From the very beginning, long before a child can name their emotions, they're learning how to feel by watching the person who feels first, their mother. Every sigh, every soothing word, every silence after a slammed door becomes a lesson in emotional regulation. A mother doesn't need to teach with instructions. She teaches with her reactions. If she meets her child's tears with calm presence, that child learns sadness is safe. If she punishes anger or ignores fear, the child learns to bury those feelings, associating them with shame or rejection. Over time, the child doesn't stop feeling. They just stop showing it. This is how emotional suppression is passed down, quietly and consistently. Imagine a little boy who falls and scrapes his knee. He looks up, scared and in pain, and his mother says, "You're fine, don't cry." Her intention might be to toughen him up, to stop his pain from growing. But what he hears is your feelings are not valid, and your pain is inconvenient. Now picture a girl who comes home from school, anxious about a social situation, and her mother responds with panic or overreaction. Suddenly, the child not only feels her own fear, she feels her mother's too. Her body learns that emotions are dangerous, overwhelming, and best avoided. In both cases, the child's nervous system adapts. They learn to suppress, avoid, or overanalyze, instead of process and release. And those habits become hardwired into adulthood. Emotionally attuned mothers help their children build what psychologists call secure attachment, a sense that they can express their inner world and still be loved. This security becomes a foundation for emotional resilience. But when emotional expression is met with dismissal, punishment, or emotional volatility, children develop anxious or avoidant attachment styles. They grow up either clinging to others for emotional regulation or isolating themselves completely, afraid to feel too much. These patterns don't come out of nowhere. They are taught, absorbed, and practiced, often without a single word. As adults, we may wonder why we shut down during conflict, why we overreact to minor stress, or why we feel guilty for crying. The answer often lies in how we were first taught to feel. Healing begins with recognizing that the way you relate to your emotions today was shaped by someone else's nervous system. You were trained to either open up or shut down, not by choice, but by survival. Understanding this gives you a new option to retrain that response, to give yourself the emotional permission you never got, and to finally feel without fear. Because while your mother taught you how to feel or not feel, you get to decide what you do with that lesson now. Number 4, you became the parent. There are some children who grow up quietly older than their years, not because they're gifted or mature, but because they had to be. They became the emotional caretaker in the home. The one who noticed when mom was sad, who learned how to cheer her up, who tiptoed around her stress to avoid making things worse. This role reversal is called parentification, and it leaves lasting marks. Instead of being held, these children learned to hold everything. They weren't just children, they were emotional regulators, little therapists, peacekeepers. And while they may have looked well-behaved on the outside, inside they were overwhelmed, anxious, and deeply alone. Maybe your mother was constantly overwhelmed or emotionally fragile. Maybe she leaned on you inappropriately, telling you things a child should never have to carry, about money problems, relationships, or her own pain. She may have cried in front of you, lashed out when you didn't say the right thing, or relied on you for emotional support more than she should have. You stepped into the role to survive, not realizing it would follow you into adulthood. Because when a child is put in the position of parent, they don't just grow up too fast. They internalize a belief that their needs don't matter, that love is something earned by caretaking, and that they are responsible for everyone's emotions but their own. The adult version of this child often looks like the overgiver. They're the ones who anticipate others' needs, who say yes when they're exhausted, who feel a deep unease when they try to rest. They may carry chronic guilt, struggling to separate their own desires from what others expect of them. Relationships feel heavy because they mistake self-abandonment for love. And underneath it all is often a buried resentment for the childhood they never really had, for the weight they were never supposed to carry. Take the story of Daniel, who as a child was his mother's confidant. She leaned on him during her divorce, telling him how lonely she was, how hard things had become. He tried to be strong, to make her laugh, to reassure her even when he felt lost himself. As an adult, Daniel found himself in one-sided relationship after another. Always the listener, the fixer, the emotional sponge. It wasn't until therapy that he realized he'd never learned how to receive support, only how to provide it. Healing began when he grieved the role reversal, forgave himself for not being able to fix everything, and learned to set boundaries that made room for his own needs. If you became the parent, you did so out of love and necessity. But now, it's time to return to your rightful place. Not to abandon your mother, but to reclaim yourself. You are allowed to be taken care of. You are allowed to say no. And most importantly, you are allowed to stop carrying a weight that was never yours to bear. Number 5. Her voice became your inner critic. You might think the voice in your head is your own, the one that says you're not doing enough, not thin enough, not smart enough, not lovable enough. But if you listen closely, you may realize that it sounds a lot like her. The quiet tone of disappointment, the sharp edge of judgment, the conditional warmth that only came when you were behaving, performing, pleasing for many people. The inner critic isn't some mysterious inner saboteur. It's an echo of their mother, not because she was cruel, but because she was human, shaped by her own limitations, insecurities, and expectations. She may have thought she was motivating you, protecting you, helping you be your best, when in reality she was planting seeds of self-doubt that would blossom into a lifelong internal battle. Imagine a girl who brings home a report card with all A's and 1 B. Her mother smiles but quickly asks, "What happened here?" The praise is swallowed by the correction. Or a boy who shows vulnerability, only to be told, "Don't be so sensitive." Each moment, small and seemingly insignificant, begins to teach the child that love is conditional, tied to performance, perfection, or emotional suppression. And over time, the mother's comments become internalized. They move from being heard in the room to being whispered in the mind. "Try harder. Don't mess this up. What will people think?" These phrases aren't facts, they're inherited scripts. Later in life, that same girl may achieve impressive things but feel no joy, always haunted by the one thing she could have done better. That boy may struggle to connect in relationships, afraid that showing emotion will make him weak or unworthy. Their inner worlds become battlegrounds, not because they are flawed, but because they were trained to critique themselves before anyone else could. This is how a mother's voice becomes a lens through which we view ourselves. And unless we examine that voice, we mistake it for truth. Healing this part of the maternal wound means separating your own values from hers. It means asking, whose voice is that? Who taught me to speak to myself this way? And most importantly, Do I want to keep listening? Reparenting yourself starts when you replace the harshness with curiosity, the pressure with compassion. You begin to talk to yourself, not as a disappointed mother, but as the kind, stable parent you always needed. The one who says, "You're okay just as you are. You don't have to earn it." Because the voice that shaped your inner world doesn't have to control it forever. You can choose a new voice, one that heals instead of harms. Number 6. She did the best she could, but that doesn't mean it was enough. It's one of the most painful and liberating realizations you can have about your mother. She did the best she could, but her best still hurt you. For a long time, you might have clung to either extreme, idolizing her or resenting her, because it felt impossible to hold both truth and compassion at once. But real healing begins in the middle, in that quiet and often uncomfortable space where you see her clearly, not as a villain, not as a saint, but as a human being. She came into motherhood carrying her own wounds, limitations, fears, and blind spots. Maybe she loved you fiercely. Maybe she sacrificed for you. Maybe she meant well, but that doesn't mean she gave you what you needed emotionally. And that gap between intention and impact is where your pain lives. You might remember moments when she was there physically, but absent emotionally. When she dismissed your feelings because she didn't know how to handle her own. When her fear came out as control, or her exhaustion made her unpredictable. None of it was necessarily malicious, but it still shaped you. You learned to shrink so she wouldn't get overwhelmed. You learned to perform so she would notice you. You learned to stay silent because speaking up brought more confusion than clarity. And when people now tell you to just be grateful for all she did, you may feel even more isolated, like your pain is somehow a betrayal of her love. But healing doesn't mean you stop loving her. It means you start loving yourself enough to be honest. It means recognizing that inherited pain is still pain, even if it wasn't intentional. Her best effort may have fallen short, not because she didn't care, but because no one taught her how to give what she never received. And now you're left holding a generational story that you didn't start but have the power to end. You can honor her struggle while acknowledging your scars. You can say she did her best, and also say it wasn't enough. These truths don't cancel each other out. They coexist. And within that coexistence is where you find your boundaries. Not walls of anger, but gates of self-respect. You get to decide what you will carry forward and what stops with you. You don't have to vilify her to free yourself. You just have to tell the truth, kindly, courageously, and with full permission to heal anyway. Number 7. Healing doesn't mean she changes. It means you do. One of the most difficult steps in healing is giving up the hope that your mother will one day understand, that she'll look you in the eyes and say the words you've always needed. I see what I did. I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that. For many, this hope lingers quietly for years, tucked behind accomplishments, therapy sessions, or silence. The fantasy that one conversation will fix everything. But the truth is, your mother may never apologize. She may never change. She may never even recognize the hurt she caused, because to do so might unravel the story she tells herself about who she is. And while that may seem tragic, it doesn't mean you can't heal. Healing doesn't start when she transforms. It starts when you stop needing her to. There comes a quiet moment, often after years of trying, crying, or confronting, when you realize that waiting for her growth is costing you yours. That every unanswered call, every denied emotion, every loop of maybe this time she'll understand, keeps you chained to the same old pain. And in that moment, you stop fighting for her recognition and start fighting for your own freedom. You stop rehearsing your pain for her and start witnessing it for yourself. You grieve not only the mother you had, but also the mother you needed and never got. And that grief becomes sacred ground, not something to run from, but something to move through. Imagine someone who spent years seeking their mother's validation, only to be met with deflection or denial. One day, instead of explaining herself again, she chooses silence. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence of peace. She lights a candle, writes a letter she'll never send, and says out loud, "I forgive you, not because you said sorry, but because I need to live." That moment is when everything changes. She doesn't need a different mother to become a different person. She starts setting boundaries, expressing her truth, and building relationships where she feels seen, not just useful. Healing is choosing to give yourself the compassion she couldn't offer. It's learning to parent yourself with patience, to talk to yourself with kindness, and to surround yourself with people who reflect your worth. Your mother may never change, but you can. And in the end, that's the change that matters most, because it's the one that sets you free. Number 8, reparenting the inner child. Healing from the wounds left by your mother often requires a radical act of self-love called reparenting. This means becoming the parent to your own inner child, the part of you that still carries pain, fear, and unmet needs from childhood. When your mother couldn't provide the safety, validation, or love you needed, that young part of you learned to survive on its own, often by numbing feelings or seeking approval from others. Reparenting is the process of returning to that vulnerable self with compassion and care, giving it what it never received. It's not about replacing your mother, but about filling the gaps she couldn't fill. Starting this journey begins with changing how you speak to yourself. Your internal dialogue may have been shaped by criticism or neglect, so now you practice gentle self-talk. Instead of berating yourself for mistakes or imperfections, you say, "It's okay to feel this way," or "You are enough just as you are." You learn to listen with kindness to the worries, fears, or doubts that bubble up and respond with reassurance. This is the voice of the loving parent that many never heard but desperately needed. Setting boundaries is another key part of reparenting. It means protecting your emotional space from people or situations that trigger old wounds or reinforce unhealthy patterns. Just as a good parent would shield a child from harm, you begin to say no to what drains or diminishes you, and yes to what nurtures and supports your growth. These boundaries create a safe environment where your inner child can finally relax and thrive. Nurturing rituals can be simple but powerful acts of care. It could be dedicating time each day to journaling your feelings, practicing meditation, or doing something that brings you joy without guilt. It might be seeking therapy, joining a support group, or engaging in creative expression to reconnect with your authentic self. These rituals become a lifeline, reminding your inner child that it is seen, valued, and loved. Imagine someone who, after years of self-criticism, begins this process by writing a letter to their younger self. In that letter, they acknowledge the loneliness, the fear, and the longing for acceptance. They promise to stand by that child from now on, to protect and nurture with patience and kindness. This simple act can feel revolutionary, like planting a seed of hope that will grow into lasting healing. Reparenting isn't quick or easy. It's a daily commitment to care for the part of you that was once neglected. But as you continue, you'll notice something profound. The child inside you starts to feel safe, the inner voice softens, and a deep sense of belonging takes root. In time, you become not only your own parent, but your own sanctuary. And from that place, true healing begins. Healing your relationship with your mother is not about assigning blame or holding on to resentment. It's about finding liberation for yourself. The journey toward healing begins with the honest and sometimes painful recognition of how she shaped your inner world. The ways her love and limitations left marks on your identity, your emotions, and your patterns. You cannot fully move forward without understanding this influence, because it forms the foundation from which you've built your life. This understanding isn't meant to trap you in the past, but to free you from it. It invites you to step into your own power, to rewrite the stories you've been living, and to embrace the possibility of wholeness. As you reflect on this journey, consider journaling your thoughts or seeking therapy, where you can explore these truths with support and compassion. Healing is an ongoing process, often non-linear, but every step you take is a step toward reclaiming your peace and purpose. Remember, we are not responsible for the wounds we received, but we are responsible for our healing. Let that truth empower you today to begin the work that sets you free.